with constructionism. This part, I'd like to talk about practical applications. Um, in researching this topic primarily, it was really funny watching a webcast with a professor from Stanford who's involved in STEM and STEAM, and she talks about how constructionism is something that is often claimed something is on the higher academics high horse and it can never be done in the classroom setting. And I had to laugh because I see over the last 3 years as I've changed my own thinking towards teaching and learning, I found myself falling more into this constructionism mindset, and it can definitely be done. Although it looks very, very different from back in the traditional days to when I was a student, like my kids now. One of the things I wanted to highlight for you first is a redesign project that I did last year with my students, in terms of redesigning my classroom into making it more 21st century skill based. Um, like the design toolkits that we are currently using in our class for our own personal redesign, I took the same toolkit models and I put that on my kids insofar as redesigning our space. So Dr. Papert really emphasizes the idea of problem-based learning. So the problem I challenged my eighth graders last year was the idea that our space is very traditional and it doesn't match what 21st century skill base is asking us to do. How can we change our space? So initially, it was really great because I was able to talk about brainstorming ideas, and we brought in experts such as our superintendent and workers from State Farm that are in innovation. We worked with hand in hand with an architect, multiple architects actually, to offer us suggestions and ideas on how this plays out. So in talking to these different facets, kids started to begin asking a bunch of questions. So in taking them hand in hand through problem-based learning, but also guiding them through the inquiry process was a win-win for me. Because ultimately we were tangibly constructing, or I should say reconstructing, a new learning space that they were going to be able to live in throughout the second semester of our school year with each other. I hate myself right now because I wish I could give you after or before pictures, but these are the current pictures of my classroom right now. As you kind of notice, the wall colors are different. Notice that there isn't a lot necessarily put on the walls. There's a lot of shelving. There's rolling chairs as opposed to standardized desks. There's a variety of seating. There's you can tell dry erase boards are kind of sporadic and not only placed permanently on the wall, but then there's also mobile um, dry erase boards, things like that. These were all put into place very purposefully by our students based on the knowledge that they gained by working with experts, by the prototypes that they created, by the research they conducted. And then once everything was established in terms of what we would consider our blueprint, we took our blueprints and we democratically decided the pieces that we really wanted in our classroom. We went to several different funding outlets as a group, and we asked for funding. We were able to be given close to $6,000 between the coupling of a couple groups that were able to give us funding. So what you're seeing here is the product of what about $6,000 can do to facelift a classroom, and make it more 21st century designed. What's even funnier about this is now my current eighth graders who did not design this classroom, they don't treat it as well as my now freshman students who will come back, and they will often come in and say, what are you doing to that table? Pick up your pencil or wipe that down, or why do you have your feet up there? They take pure ownership because it is something that they have created from the ground up, and there's a lot of ownership in that creation. So in thinking about that problem and solving it and turning into something that's very proactive, kids were able to see the result of that learning and lean back on those experiences and remember that as they move forward in their other pieces of thinking throughout the year. Other ways I take a look at constructionism, especially integrating technology, I intersect that with literature quite a bit because I do want kids to become familiar with the inquiry process. And so these are 3 novels that I've taught over the years that have threads of social justice issues. Monster, working with the juvenile justice system. The Impossible Knife of Memory touches on PTSD and a single father family. And then also Paper Things touches on modern day homelessness. If you can kind of steer your eyes over to Monster, you're going to see above the book cover a couple of pieces of print media examples that my students created as a result of studying this book. So similar to the other book studies, as you can see the screenshots of the other interviews that were involved in these cases. I take students through a journey of not only reading the book and doing all the really cool English things that I know really well for 13 years that I did, but then I take it a step further by integrating actual interviews, that bringing in people of interest that would actually be a live person within that book, social workers, experts, psychologists. In Monster's case, we had the state's attorney come in who was a prosecutor, things that would provide real voice so that kids can compare the fiction and the reality of the context. From there, I also have them take a look at podcasting. So they collaboratively have to make a podcast connecting a nonfiction article to something that's occurring in the book. And then also they have to blog about some of the things that we naturally know that are traditional English practices, characters, settings, plots, things like that. Once that's all said and done, I encourage kids to ask additional questions, especially after reading Monster in a predominantly rural white school. There were lots of questions that would have leaned a lot on stereotypes. So it was a really great opportunity for me to tackle those stereotypes in a very safe environment for kids. And so the next step after addressing all those questions and breaking that down and doing some research and kind of breaking those stereotypes, I challenge students to create an awareness campaign. So from there, this is where we kind of touch into Dr. Pappert's actual tangible construction of learning and gaining that experience. So you'll see onto the right of Monster, you'll see a print media that talks about, it's basically an infographic. It's from a campaign called What You Didn't Know. And these students collaboratively worked together to create a campaign that talked about life in prison and not making the choice to go into prison, and trying to steer kids away from making poor choices that would lead them into those paths. So I know it's really hard to see, but if you read underneath it, it says, "What color will you wear?" And on one side is the blue graduation cap, and on the other side is the orange inmate color. This was all done via an iPad, and they used actual pictures. Those were a picture of an actual student, and they cropped those together, and then they used a picture cropping app on the iPad to create this message. So they're actually they're taking their research and they're constructing pieces for their campaign so that they can create an awareness. And we were able to present these and put these out in the hallway and educate other students so that they would be more informed of the messages of their campaigns. And so equally, I did that year after year. So Monster was my first year. The Impossible Knife of Memory was last year. And then Paper Things this year, working with modern day homelessness, was what we studied this year. We went through basically the same practices, but it's really interesting as Dr. Pappert really talks about how teachers should also equally be learning. As I pick new social justice topics, you can never predict how kids are going to construct their own meaning, or what they want to talk about, or what they have questions about, and so it may seem like the same skeleton every year, but in terms of the journey to construct meaning, It is way different, and it keeps things very exciting, and it's definitely